Hey guys, I am recording the video for chapter 10 today on April 22nd. I'm sorry for like a last minute announcement where I pushed everything to be due at the end of today. I had, the previous videos recorded. I was just scheduled to do this video today and I fell behind for my other job, but it's fine. I know you guys don't really mind having an extra 6 hours to get your work done. So I hope that helped anybody who needed the extra help. I also hope that you guys had a good spring break. I'm curious how everyone's doing. If anybody knows anyone who's been diagnosed or healed, recovered from COVID, or if you guys have been affected personally, if you want to share with us. If not, then I hope everybody's doing okay. I personally, thank God, I've known a few people who did have it but recovered, and I don't know anybody really personal like in my life, like a direct family member. But all right, so we should be caught up when it comes to chapter 9. So by now you should have already watched the video, went through the PowerPoint for chapter 9, and now you're going into chapter 10, which is basically based on divorce, remarriages, and blended families. I know the chapter 9 video was kind of long from what I remember, and I know even though you guys had 2 weeks of spring break, I'm still kind of just doing a lecture as if we were in class. So I'm going to try to make this really short. If there's anything that I skip over, because remember, these chapters are what you're going to be using for your paper 4. So if there's anything that you read that you're of interest and you want to write about for your paper and I didn't cover it in depth in any of the videos, let me know and I will try to cover that in the next video. You guys have paper 3 due next week, and I just want to, remind you it's going to be the same as the other paper, due at the end of the day next Wednesday. Post upload the actual document. And then you're going to respond to somebody's video, which I'll give you until the ending of the next day to do that. Any other questions, email me. I want to make this video fast. And I want to get into talking about One of Us, which by now you should have watched that movie, documentary. But all right, so let's get started. I am opening up chapter 10 and moving on from slide 2, which I basically just quickly summarized the different topics that are addressed in this chapter when it comes to divorce. Although, again, divorce, remarriage, and blended families are discussed in this chapter, I focus mostly, this is like a horrible angle, I focus mostly on this lecture on divorce, but of course, remarriage and blended families is an obvious production of that, right? It's an obvious result, right? You get divorced, you end up remarrying, and then you end up having a blended family if you had children in the first place. So again, like I said, if you realize this book kind of goes in order of what that social script of life is, right? So we have like gender, you have identifying with a gender, then you getting a sex, identifying yourself with your sexuality, and then you start dating. We have the whole dating, relationships, falling in love, marry, children, and now we're up to the inevitable, unfortunately, divorce. And that's kind of what the theme that's discussed here is, how divorce is becoming more and more normal. And they equate this a lot with the rise of the individual. This is also related to one of our earlier theories of modernity, of with modern times, instead of us focusing and recognizing ourselves as a group, we're seeing ourselves more as individuals. So instead of identifying yourself with your family, you're yourself. You're right. I'm Giovanni Rodriguez. I'm not just a part of this group. What I need and what I want matters too. It's not just always about the good of the group. It's interesting how that kind of conflicts with what's going on today with the COVID situation. Oh my God, my neck hurts. I've been sitting at this chair all day. The COVID, right? That's a big argument that we're saying to people. So individually, there are people who are protesting and saying, I want my freedom, and this is more constricting, and all those protesters. And I'm curious about your guys' opinion on that. And I think I actually sent another video, but with the rise of individualism, it's not even a rise anymore. It's just how it is. Do you equate that with a situation like what's happening now, or do you separate it? And just to bring it back to divorce, to the topic of divorce, how do we, reconcile the restraints of being in a duo, of being in a group that is a representation of a larger family, and also try to balance your individuality and progress as a person in a society with just the idea of me versus a group, which is your family. So that's just a conflict that's discussed in this book. And we see that with the movie One of Us, right? So she has to make this horrible decision of whether or not she's going to live with an abuser and in order to stay with her children. And that's a choice that she has to make for her family or for herself, right? And then she has this powerful group of people who are basically ruining her life because she's making a decision for herself. So this documentary was such a perfect representation of that battle of like the individual versus the group, and what one group thinks a family should be and what one group thinks a family shouldn't. And that also reflects a lot of what I want you guys to write about in your next 2 papers. So yeah, we're gonna get into that, but let me see, 6 minutes. Boom, let me just keep going. All right, so the unstableness of the modern marriage, how there's like this looming thought now, right? So divorce is more common now. So the fact that divorce is more common, it could be more positive to you, but it could be seen as more negative to others. So it's interesting how, so it starts by saying it could have the notes here. With divorce increasing, it could represent either the liberation of an unhappy spouse, or it can mean that the institution of marriage is failing. So how do you see it? So if I'd like to hear your opinions on that in the comments below. And then of course the inevitable, the risks and the consequences, and how does this affect children. So as you're reading this and as I'm lecturing, I want you guys to think about in terms of how you're going to write about this in your paper, where I'm having you write about the positives and the negatives. This isn't qualified for a chapter for your next paper, but you're writing something similar for paper 4, but in terms of your family being a haven and an institution that's reproducing inequalities. So try to think in that framework when you're reading like this. All right. Oh, girl, I'm on the wrong PowerPoint. It's all right though, because the one I just had. All right, so the one I was just reading, what I was just reading off of was slide 3. I just kind of skipped over slide 2, but slide 2 I'm listing what Cohen discusses in his 3 areas of a divorce, and I highlighted the causes and consequences of a divorce because that's what I want to focus on. So again, if there's something that I don't really get into that you want me to go into, I will for you if you really need to. And then slide 3 is what I was just reading off of. And now we're going to slide 4. So this is the part of the chapter that's kind of the introduction part. I'm going to skip over church and state, divorce rates and trends, and just focus a little bit more on the discussion of the children's sake, especially because it relates to One of Us. So the parents, and I'm going to try to go a little bit fast. So parents try to delay or prevent. So there's 2 sides of it, right? Why do parents get divorce? Either you get a divorce for the children or you get a divorce to protect the children. So it's like 2 sides of this coin, right? I'm sure that a lot of you guys probably have had experience, whether it's your own personal life as the children or someone that you know, or just, I don't know how many, if anyone here has had a divorce, but it's just, even in media and TV shows, movies, people holding on to a relationship because they think it's better for their children, but then there's the other side of people letting it go because that's also better for the children, right? It was addiction, abuse, and we're going to get into abuse, I think it's chapter 12. But yeah, so, and also, there's a lot of times that no matter what the issue is, a lot of religious reasons as to why it doesn't matter what, you shouldn't get a divorce. You hear like, oh, like I'm Catholic, I don't believe in divorce, equated to something as tragic as like an abortion. And that's similar to what we saw in One of Us, right? So it doesn't matter who was an abuser. And, like with Loser, I think the guy's name, Loser, he wanted to get a divorce and his mom like disowned him, didn't speak to him for 7 years. So, but again, with the changes that we've discussed in all these chapters, I don't want to repeat every single one, and this new norm of divorce being the norm, it leads to other social changes, and that's what we relate to the concept of the book of diversity, social class inequality, and social change. All right, so moving on to slide 6. So I said I'm going to skip this part of the chapter, and I will leave these specific notes for you guys on the slide, and you can read it on your own, but it's also on pages 363 to 368, and these are just some more specific definitions of how do we define divorce. And then slide 8 is a chart which shows the crude divorce rate from 1860 to 2015. Slide 9, we have, so from slides 9 to 12, we have 4 different pie charts that show the differences in divorce rates. The main gist I want you guys to get out of this, and the same thing we saw in chapter 9, is how there's differences. Oh my God, I've been talking all day on camera. The differences that we find with divorce rates are the same ones that we've been finding consistently throughout the book when it comes to fertility rates, poverty, education, remarriages, cohabitation, I could just tell you guys, there's so many consistent things that have been, there were so many statistics that were consistent in this book that it makes you just question why people still to this day doubt that there are differences between the races when it comes to our statuses in society. And, when you bring it up, you're like, oh, you're bringing up race again. And, but it's like, these are real things. These are real statistical numbers that exist. It's not something that's being made up. Whether or not you think that it should result in a different outcome in someone's life, right? If you think someone's using it as an excuse, whatever, okay, that's something you could talk about. These are real numbers, period, So chapters 9, so these slides show that divorce on level of education, divorce by race and ethnicity, percentages of just divorces by how many times they were married before, and broken out by the number of years married. So in your, even though paper 3 are using different chapters, this is something that you can discuss in your chapter paper 3 and paper 4. How the family as an institution how it can be positive for some and negative for others. How, like I said, for the last chapter when it came to children, how this expectation of having children is the only way some people can be considered a family. However, what about the African American woman who has the high, the low fertility rate in comparison to the white woman, right? You say that fertility problems is equated with shame. And the same thing with divorce. If divorce is, and we see later on in the chapter, divorce leads to so many negative things to children, and divorce is so much more common in one type of family, what does that mean for those type of kids, right? This is what you guys are thinking about or should be thinking about and then writing about in your paper, about the negatives and the positives of the family institution. All right, so the causes of divorce. These are the 3 main points that I brought up in the chapter. Wait a second. Okay. All right, got it. So on slide 13, the 3 main points I discussed in the chapter. I'm not going to really get into it, but one thing, I'm moving on to slide 14 that I want you guys to focus on is, again, the statistics of divorce being more common among people with less education, those who have been married previously, and African Americans and Native Americans. And it's so crazy because, like I brought up in the last class lecture of bringing up the situation with COVID and how African Americans are now dying at higher rates than other people because of larger social forces. The same thing here. The causes of divorce, they're getting more divorces because of larger social forces. And with Native Americans, I literally saw the other day about how the Navajo Native Americans are dying at such high rates, and they're dying at rates that was higher than 13 states combined. I was like, nobody's talking about this. And they were in the largest ICU room for this group of people, and there was 12 beds. And I was like, it's crazy because of, just not even just from me teaching this class, my own personal knowledge of what these people have gone through. And then you see here, there's like another, like divorce, and then these social forces that play a role in all these specific things. And then something like COVID comes up, and they're again, like in this category of the worst. It's just, it's interesting. So larger sort forces, so we have these demographics, and then also how cohabitation and age also play a role of whether or not. So these are things that sociologists are studying. So are you more likely to get a divorce if you never cohabited with the person, or basically the role that cohabitation plays in divorce rates. So moving on to slide 15 is another chart about the chance of getting a divorce within the first 10 years of marriage. All right, slide 16. Why are couples more likely to get divorced? I'm going to read past these really fast. Unhappy, less time alone, they disagree frequently, taxes, tasks, money, etc. Next slide, spend less time alone with each other, they disagree. Did I put the same? Oh, okay, I just moved the other ones down. Okay, and they have heated arguments, shout at or hit each other. So, for anybody here who's had a divorce or are children whose parents have divorced, is there something here that maybe you agree with, or is there something here that you've experienced, or is there something here you feel like is missing? Why do people get divorced? I'm just curious about your kind of personal experience if you feel like sharing about this. Moving on, and then of course think about, just really quick, with these reasons that people get divorced, think about how these things relate to other demographics, right? So we have, they spend less time alone with each other. Well, think about the two working parents who have full-time jobs or more than one job, and that, economically, and what kind of race that group could be in, or social class. Disagreeing about money, and heated arguments, shouting at each other, etc. So, just connecting everything else we've learned about the past few chapters. All right, causes of divorce, the role that women play. Again, here we are talking about women. So let me know, what do you guys think about this? Because I know I've read papers specifically for some males in this class who have said things such as, maybe it's better if the woman stays home. And we learned in the last chapter about this idea of this intensive motherhood and, this cultural expectation for women to fulfill so many different roles, and this shoulder, this weight on the shoulder of like, not only working, but also, having to be the nurturing mother, and then also being the breadwinner in some cases. So how that's affected divorce rates. So we have independence effect and income effect. So with all these theories of, the women's suffrage movement, and like what we saw with the ERA, with more women coming into the workforce, some critics were saying that this was because there's more, divorce was going up because women were doing all these things. However, it is it doesn't correlate with each other that specifically, but during this time period, laws were becoming more loose, and it's explaining a chapter where they were letting people get divorced and not have to say a specific reason, right? So it wasn't necessarily something that the state had to get involved in. And you demand a legitimate reason. You could just say, I need to get a divorce. So the independence effect and the income effect. So this is two different point of views on how women's independence can play a role in divorce. So it's a more positive and a more negative. When women and men are more economically independent, they have the means to survive on their own, so therefore they'll be most likely to leave the marriage if they have to. So that's the key word. So with the independence effect, it's saying that, yes, of course, if a woman is economically independent, she will most likely leave the marriage, but that's not the only reason why. She will only most likely do so if she is unhappy. That's the key thing that Cohen emphasizes there. And I think it's important to emphasize, especially with people who put this idea that just like, oh, well, now women are making more money and this is going to end the family institution because they don't have a reason to depend on their husbands anymore. And the thing about that is that no, a woman will, and they say that here, that most couples that don't divorce are couples that both make a lot of money together. It's not so much with women making a lot of money, it's the happiness that has to go with that too. And it might sound kind of like like, what do you mean happiness? But that's something that's measurable, that's something that's studied, and that's something that's actually discussed in this chapter, right? Somebody's happiness, how you define that can be different in many ways, but it's still something that exists. So that's the independence effect, that when you're economically independent, you will be most likely to be self-sufficient and be able to leave a situation that you are not happy in. Versus the income effect, which is where independence can work to strengthen the marriage as well. So tell me what you guys agree with. Couples with high levels of education and high incomes are less likely to get divorced. Okay, so again, couples with high levels of education and high incomes are less likely to get divorced. So again, think about which race that entails, or at least percentage-wise, right? I'm not saying that only one type of race has this privilege. I'm just saying percentage-wise, right? And then on it says that researchers have linked having higher income with increased stability, happiness, and reduced stress. So there you go. All right, so this is the kind of juice where I was trying to get at, and I'm going to try to end this at 30 minutes. So, children's well-being, and then we're going to relate this to one of us. Common outcomes for the children: short-term emotional behavior problems, permanent emotional changes, new roles and identities. So we are going to, hold on a second. Okay. Oh, sorry. I just fast forward this. What slide was this? All right. So we are going to kind of relate this to what we saw in the movie, even though we don't see it really happens with the children, but at the end you kind of see it. But I mean, even without, I don't know if you guys have anyone who feels comfortable sharing with their own personal experience of the difference of like that the short term that you deal with at the beginning of the transition. And that's something I didn't get into the last video, and I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't, but I was trying so hard to keep it short. But the transitions, so with the discussion of what children go through and what cohabiting families and stepchildren and blended families, etc., and having different partners coming in and out of your parents' life, it's described in this book as transitions, and how this could have a negative effect on children because there's nothing stable. Well, at least it can be nothing stable for a very long time. And again, think about, and that was something that was interesting because in the documentary, they brought up that as a reason that she lost her kids because she wasn't keeping the status quo, right? So although watching that, it's like, all right, they're being, ridiculous. That's a real thing in sociology with this idea of transitions, of so much change happening in a child's life, and that may having a negative effect on them. I'm not saying that they're right for that. I'm just saying that that's something that relates to the discussion of transitions. But, all right, so I'm moving on to slide 20, marital happiness by family income. So this is what I said before. I'm moving past 21. I'm moving past 22. This where with economic status, divorce might be a better alternative to unhappy families. We know that. And just really quick to bring up economic status, who does divorce most likely hurt economically? Women. Men make more money overall. Even when men have to pay child support. Even if a man has to pay child support, divorce always economically lowers the women's household income. That's just a fact as well. Of course, there are situations where the woman has to pay and the woman does make more money. But usually it will be that the woman is going to be the one who is losing income. I don't know what to do with this phone. I'm like sick of this angle. All right. Kind of like this one either. I'm going to keep this going. So 24 is a chart of poverty and divorce, and about 7% of overall mothers are about 7% more likely to be in poverty than fathers. So again, remember when we said that single mothers are most likely to be African American, right? So again, we're linking all these things that we've learned before. Gender differences in poverty rates are a crucial feature of the consequences of divorce, effectively negatively affecting children. And then if you remember when we read about how different income levels lead to different ways that we bring up our children. All right, 25 and 26. So different stressors and factors for children. So we have the divorce stressors for children, and then slide 26, we have the protective factors for children. So one is basically just showing how the divorce has many different effects on children. This starts at page 382. And the next one is showing different factors which we can implement in order to protect them from the negative factors of divorce. So I wanted to emphasize this part because, again, for your paper, and I know I see the views, and I know that people are watching these videos, which obviously they're mandatory, you have to comment, but I put up the other videos explaining how to do paper 3. That video has 7 views. I don't care. For the people that have helped, I'm glad. But if you're not watching those videos and you're confused, and I get that email next week, like, I don't know, then that's on you. Because it's there, I'm explaining to you. And if you're just going to wait till next Tuesday to try to write a paper and then get frustrated because you don't know what the hell I'm asking you and you didn't watch the video, that's not my problem. Just saying. Anyway, so the reason I'm bringing this up, because this is such a perfect topic that can be used for paper 4 specifically. And I'm going to give you an example like I have in the past of how to word it and, focus it on this idea of an institution perpetuating inequalities in society or being a haven. But I thought this was interesting because it goes how divorce can be all these stressors for children, but then it also goes into they can be protective factors for children and how the family has a lot to do with that. So if you go on these pages, it says that with a lot of times with divorce between parents, a lot of the times the fathers will become more involved in the children's life after that. So although, it's not necessarily always a positive, I just, thought that was interesting in terms of this idea, this discussion we're kind of having in the last half of this class of the family institution playing a positive role in someone's life and a negative role. So divorce obviously being the negative is what I'm saying, right? And then this divorce stressors can obviously be your listing of what's negative about the family. Family institution is negative, and because this family institution is negative because so. However, it also can represent how the family can be in haven, because at the end, this is kind of where a child can end up getting their protective resources from, right? I don't know, it's just, me and my head going off. Common outcomes, and these are the outcomes that I listed previously on slide 27. So the last part of the chapter goes into remarriage and blended families. I'm gonna leave these notes here. You guys can go through on your own time. The main thing I wanted you to just get out of this was the idea of boundary ambiguity of the situation in which families do not know or who agree who is in the family. And this relates to the last chapter with social bonds and social networks about parenting, and how for children, the establishment of who your family is like one of the very first important parts of a healthy childhood and development. And it's something that, you don't really think about or realize, but growing up, knowing who's your mom, who's your dad, who are your grandparents, who's your aunt, who's your cousins, who's your sister, who's your brother, who's your friends, and so forth. It helps you learn the boundaries of how do you act with one person versus the other, right? You don't act with your mom and dad the way you act with your aunt and uncle, but you also don't act with your teacher the way you act with your aunt and uncle, right? There's certain things you can get away with. There's certain, even clothing, dress, walk around with a t-shirt on versus, okay, this one's coming over, let me put on pants. You know what I mean? This certain, just right, that's just like the foundation of how we learn how to be social in different situations. So with boundary ambiguity, with remarriage and blended families, this whole thing is about how with all these different families that are coming out, like remarriages and blended families and stepchildren, etc., it's hard. We want to be able to define something. That's why with like the gender discussion, it was like, we're not male, you're not female, we don't know how to act with you, right? It's like weird. Like, I need to know if you're a girl because I need to know if I need to like hold the door for you, right? I need to know if you're a boy because I need to know like if I need to like cross my legs, right? So it's kind of like that, like with the idea of that, right? That with families constantly changing, you know, there can be this kind of ambiguous idea of what your who's a family member and who's not. That's basically that's just what I want to point out, and I wanted to bring that up here. And it also can be a relation of like, oh, like that's your cousin, that's not your cousin, right? You guys know what I mean? Whatever. Anyone has a example of that they like to share, go ahead. But all right, so I'm moving ahead. All these charts are here for you guys to look at your own sign. And finally, I'm going to go into Netflix's One of Us. I'll go into that in the last 5 minutes. And I'm sorry, I tried to go really fast. I didn't want you to have 2 really long videos to watch, but all right. So One of Us tells the story of 3, and I assume everybody watched the video because I told everybody email me if you didn't have Netflix. Only 2 people emailed me. So that's whatever. But anyway, so One of Us, I came across this and I was so interested in it because I grew up in Williamsburg and I grew up around the Hasidic community, and there was always this weird tension with like the Puerto Ricans in the neighborhood. If anyone grows up there, let me know. And like the Hasidic Jews, like we're very separate. Like no one ever plays with the other. And as a kid, I never understood it. But now that I'm older, I do. And then like when you're younger, you kind of take it personal. And I always wonder how they felt about it. And it was interesting to see this because although I doubt everyone feels the way these 3 characters felt, it was still interesting to see. But yeah, so Hasidic Jews, this insular group of ultra-Orthodox Jews, came from 18th century Europe. The thing that's interesting about them is that they're, as one woman from a group explains them, is that they're this community of survivors with extreme trauma, that they're like all come from ancestors who survived the Holocaust, and they fled, you know, from World War II and landed here in Brooklyn, New York. And in order to kind of keep these old traditions and stay true to their ancestors, they're extremely, extremely old school religious and hold really, really, really tight religious law. And they have a lot of power here in New York. You know, they have a lot of subsidized housing. They get cash assistance. You know, a lot of them are mostly like on food stamps, you know, things like that. It's such an interesting dynamic, but at the same time, they have a lot of money. They own a lot of property in New York and businesses, and they're very patriarchal, like extremely. The women are just basically there to get married and have kid after kid after kid after kid. And if anyone here is of that community and feels as if I'm explaining it wrong, you know, this is my understanding from watching the documentary. I'm just my own, you know, being around these groups of people growing up and my own research. Was anything that was in this video that you feel like was wrong, let me know, please comment. But yeah, so we have Eddie, who's this woman who was getting a divorce and from an abusive husband, and the community was completely against her. And then we have Ari, who's like a drug addict, recovering drug addict, and he just was not feeling the community. And then we have Lucer, who's like my favorite, and he was like in LA trying to be an actor. And it's so interesting to me because I feel like I've watched, you know, I'm such a big person when it comes to representation in the media and actors, and you know, we need more Black models and we need more, you know, Spanish women on TV and just families, and not everybody's just a white family, right? And when I watched this, I was like, wow, I've never really thought about like Hasidic Jewish representation in television, right? Because like the same way when we say like, well, we don't need every single time a Chinese person's on film to be doing karate, and we don't need every single time a Hispanic woman's on film to be cleaning a hotel. Like, why, you know, like, it's like, that's something I never really thought of. Like, you know, like every time we see a Hasidic Jewish person, they're always playing the role of like a Hasidic Jewish person. You know what I mean? Like on SVU. I think that's the only time I've ever seen Hasidic Jews on television is like on SVU. Let me know what you guys, anything on that. But anyway, so I just have a few things highlighted that I want to bring up about this. The idea of her being considered a traitor because she broke religious law and cannot turn in a fellow Jew. You know what that reminded me of? The Bloods and the Crips, right? When she was like, you know, it's religious law to not turn in somebody to the cops. I was like, that sounds just like gang life, but I don't know. I'm just highlighting really quick my thoughts that from when I saw this. What else? Consensus and conflict. So I saw a lot of consensus and conflict with Ari was sitting down with that. I don't want to get it wrong. I think he was a rabbi, where he was saying his friends were ignoring him. And the rabbi was saying to him, people have to fit in and shut up. Don't ask any questions. We do things repeatedly. It's been working for thousands of years for a reason. Boom. Consensus perspective. Like I saw that and I was like, wow, like this is such a perfect consensus versus conflict, which Ari was saying that he's like the black sheep, he's the outsider. He asks his questions. Why does God exist? If God does exist, why is he letting little boys get raped? And you know, the guy comes back and says, yeah, like what about the Holocaust? But I thought that was so interesting. I gotta charge my phone. But you know, these are things that I'm just kind of, oh my God, I got so nervous my video stopped. These are things I'm just kind of, I want you guys to comment on. So I'm not going to ask any specific questions, but let me know what you guys think. So that, I thought that was interesting. What about when they were in like Yankee Stadium and they were talking about the dangers of the internet? I was like, what? That is so crazy. When they were like, and it was all men, right? It was just so interesting to see that. And at my job, I had a case with a lot of them, and they won't even like I knew I couldn't shake their hand, but like they wouldn't even look at me, like, and it was like when you asked a question they were like shocked and offended that I was even, you know, like me and like an ADA had the balls to question this man, like, well, what did you do with the money, you know what I mean? And it was like, and especially for me, like I got like intimidated because it was like, wow, like he looks like, you know what I mean, like angry. I don't know, I don't want to say too much. But when Ari was like, oh, he called Google and Wikipedia a gift from God. I thought that was funny. Kind of relating to the book of when you see with both Eddie and Lucer about how the kids were kind of used as tools, right? So Eddie was going against the family, so they're taking the kids away from her. The same thing with Lucer. He doesn't see his kids anymore because he chose to not to be religious anymore. And I thought that was interesting of how the kids were used as these tools. And just to go back to what we talked about in chapter 9. This idea of family, how we've talked about different definitions of family for so long, I thought was interesting, especially when the Hasidic community, she said like the Hasidic community is your family. And then once you lose that, you're very alone, and that you're most likely going to like go out and be a loser or end up dead or in jail. Right? So just going back to like our definitions of legal, biological, and personal, right? This is, I mean, technically like a personal family, but also some biological, right? Because they are, some of them are linked to each other. I also thought it was interesting when Eddie calls 911 in the beginning and she's like, there's these men at my door, I don't know who they are. And the 911 operator's like, oh, like gonna send police, and she's like, yeah, it's like my husband's brothers. She's like, oh, so it's a family dispute. And like because she said it was her husband's brothers, it was like the 911 operator saw it as less of a big deal because she was like, oh well, it's not strangers, it's your family. And it's like, oh, but regardless, and we're gonna learn this in the next few chapters, families are like the number one killers of another person. You know, like if someone's gonna get killed, it's most likely for or go missing or anything, be abused, it's more to be for someone that they know versus a stranger. So I thought that was interesting that like the 911 operators seem to be like, oh, so it's a family dispute, right? Anybody else catch that? I don't know. That's like, I'm reading my notes. I'm just talking as if we're in class together. But comment, let me know what you guys think about what I'm saying. I mean, when Eddie was talking about what she's been through. Oh, and Eddie, so she's a lesbian. They didn't even bring it up in the documentary. I'm sure my students who didn't have the video and had to read about it, I put up links on Blackboard for you guys to read and see more about it. But she was a lesbian. For some reason, they did not bring it up in YouTube. So I'm curious, why do you guys think they didn't bring that up on Netflix? Like, do you think there's a reason for that? What do you guys think about that? But also, like, when she was talking about giving birth and getting married at 18 and then having like 7 kids by the time she was 26, she's like, I had postpartum for 6 years. her story completely breaks my heart, and I'm constantly looking for updates on her life. Like the fact when she had her kids taken away from her, 7 kids by the time you're 26. Like, think about your ages in life. And I love when the woman from Footsteps is like, where's the choice in that? You know, like, you're trained motherhood, and, you know, just think about family, and think about, again, and this is what I have you guys answering a discussion board post. What is the negative aspects and positive aspects of the family institution? So let's go. So I'm going to move ahead to discuss to this next slide, which just, I mean, I'm not going to go give basic answers, but I basically just did throughout the whole chapter. What are the negative aspects in a family institution? So, I mean, we just went over for divorce. And specifically, I want you to use, when I say use One of Us and chapter 10, I mean use One of Us and chapter 10. Like, I look at your answer, I'm like, did they write something from One of Us? Better if you use the names, if you don't just write like this lady, right? Like, but anyway. So yes, like I just spoke to you guys on like the divorce and how it affects children. That would have been a perfect thing to put in your answer. And then One of Us, I mean, how the Hasidic community uses secular law to their advantage and then uses it completely against her when like the status quo. And she has absolutely, like, the NYPD has like absolutely no, she was like, this law has nothing to do with us. Like, they have their complete own ambulance, cops, schooling. I don't know. I mean, there's one, I want to cut this video. I feel bad having these long videos, but if you know, I'm going to read your answers, but yeah, I mean, this video was so perfect documentary to show negative aspects of the family institution, specifically with religion. So the chapter, which I didn't get into in the lecture, of how the state, right, market arenas, I mean, the institutional arenas, we have state, market, and the family, and how they overlap. This is such a perfect example of how the state arena doesn't have any influence over this family arena because it's religion. And we don't really get into the religious arena, although it can be part of the state. But most modern marriages, we're involved with the state. They have everything to do with us getting a divorce, getting married, right? We just got checks for being married and for having kids, right? Like, if you're getting married, the state is involved. But this is religious, right? So this is something that's different we haven't really spoken about. And the state of New York doesn't help them. So I just thought that was so interesting. What else did I highlight? So transitions of the status quo. And yeah, so I'll just ask you guys a kind of general last question. So what do you guys think about that? Did you think that her losing her children was worth a price that was worth paying? What about Lucer? What about Ari? Like, do you guys know anything about the Hasidic community? Or was anybody in it? Again, I'm sorry I don't know if I said anything like offensive or wrong. Correct me, please. You know, respectfully. But would you think that was a price that was worth paying? What would you have done? Like, what would you have done? But alright, I don't know. I got a little too much into it. Just want to talk to you guys. Been talking about work all day. But alright. And oh yeah, and again, just really quick, a lot of this data is based on heterosexual couples in this chapter, because again, that's with the data that was available. But all right. Oh, on the last slide, I put up Google employees complained the word family was homophobic in a company presentation. Read that article. It's not mandatory, but you can write about it and actually credit. Kind of relates to chapters 9 and 10, but also relates to this idea of the family as an institution perpetuating inequalities and kind of outdated ideas. So I'll go into this the next slide just because I'm at 43 minutes. But all right, thank you guys, and wash your hands, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.